Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today is Keel Hunt, Tennessean columnist, former gubernatorial aide. He's written a book called Crossing the Aisle about politicians and people in Tennessee working together to get things done, particularly during the 80s and 90s. Keel, what is it specifically about Tennessee that made us be able to work across the aisle where perhaps other states haven't done that?
I think it has a great deal to do, Pat, with the history of our state. What some people know and a lot of people don't realize is that Tennessee actually was the last state to leave the Union and join the Confederacy in the Civil War.
Took 2 votes. The first one failed.
It took 2 votes, right? And then later was the first state back in the Union, and I think that had a lot to do. Not just with the personalities that were involved as governor and so forth, but with a sort of basic ambivalence toward important national issues, and certainly the breakup of the Union was. So it had a lot to do with that. There's been this willingness ever since to consider both sides and weigh them carefully, and even to the present day. I think that's been an important part of our history, and out of that history came a lot of extraordinary political leaders of both parties. I say in the book, I think competition had a lot to do with that. There are some real downsides to supermajorities. You know, back when I became a news reporter covering the legislature and so forth, where you had a supermajority on the Democrat side, you had a lot of internal fight among Democrats, just as we do now among Republicans.
With having supermajorities, is there such a thing as working across the party aisle to get things done? Because the Republican Party, much like the Democrats, they're not quite as factionalized as Democrats used to be, but increasingly you see if there's a problem getting something done in the state, it's now because the Republicans can't agree on what needs to be done. If they did agree, it would already pass through the legislature easily.
Oh, very much so.
So, is there a way to be able to work on something called intra-party across the aisle?
Well, there needs to be. There needs to be. I mean, we've seen disagreement very recently on, for example, the issue of Medicaid expansion in our state. That hadn't been resolved yet.
The governor wanted to do it. The legislature
Governor Haslam proposed it. A majority of his party in the General Assembly said no, and they stopped it. Now that may well be an issue. I noticed that former Mayor Carl Dean announced as part of his candidacy for governor just this past week that he's going to call, if he wins, he's going to call a special session to address that. And it'll probably take something extraordinary like that to get to, and of course we'll see what the election results are Tuesday night.
Your book is history, but a lot of it does focus on some specific heroines or heroes in this. Right. Howard Baker perhaps first in that, because he was the person who said, think about what the other guy has to say, maybe he has a good idea from time to time, but also you have Lamar Alexander and Governor Ned Ray McWhorter. Right. In this, particularly the relationship of those last two, both as Speaker and Governor, and then when Ned McWhorter was Governor. All of those folks are either passed away from the scene or in the final days of their political career. Who takes their places going forward?
Well, many of those are gone, true. But some of the ones whose stories I try to tell here are still active and still able to contribute to what you're pushing for. I mean, this is not solely about people who reigned in the 1980s. I mean, the later stories in the book are about how good things happened in the 90s and so forth. For example,
you've got the Predators coming to Nashville. You've
Predators
got the
coming, the NFL coming to Nashville. Memphis had tried, and for a lot of important reasons, it didn't happen in Memphis. And then, quite separately, the Oilers coming. That opportunity, came, and so you had current leaders. Then Mayor Phil Bredesen, later Governor. Senator Bob Corker and others of both parties who were able to work together. The NFL story and how that happened in Nashville in particular was a good illustration of the kind of thing I'm hoping I've caught here, and I hope people will read about.
But there is a concern that you have for the rest of this book, if there is a sequel to this, about whether this kind of tradition of crossing the aisle is going to continue in Tennessee, or whether we've become more like Washington in the years ahead.
Right. That's the choice, it seems to me, in just 4 days, and how the elections turn out, because it needs to happen. You know, we'll call it bipartisanship. It's interesting, and now just to illustrate how hard it is, though, now that there are words in our vocabulary that used to be common, like bipartisanship and cooperation and compromise and collaboration, that have, you know, I mean, some political leaders want those to be thought of as dirty words and bad words. Well, they're not dirty words, and they're good words. And so I had one in an interview with one elected official in Tennessee. He said, "Well, just please don't call me a moderate." Well, you know, moderate is how things happen. The compromise is not bad. It is the only way things happen in a representative democracy.
We talk a lot about the need for both sides to work together, and if you poll it, the public's very much for it. But what can the public do to encourage it? We've talked a lot about the personalities involved in those people, and they have made it happen over the years. But what does the public need to do when they're not voting to encourage this kind of reaching across the aisle? Well,
the first thing is to vote. And if nobody has, if a person has not early voted yet, there's still time on Tuesday. But in fact, our early voting results have been breathtaking. I mean, so many people have turned out. Now, what does that mean? We don't know specifically until Tuesday night, we hope. But you can, I mean, people can still make themselves heard. And I think a lot of the bad practices and behaviors we see now likely will never change until the elected officials and their staffs hear from people who have voted. And it's why nobody should stay home on Election Day. This is what's at stake, and really it's the future of our country. And that's why I say that bipartisanship, which worked here and moved Tennessee ahead in measurable, important ways, the auto industry coming down here, professional sports, I mean, you name it, and that's the kind of progress that is possible. I'm an optimist, I admit that, but I think it's something that can happen.
Keel Hunt's our guest. He's the author of the book called Crossing the Aisle. Back to continue our conversation with Mr. Hunt after this break.